Proview might actually be the most powerful tool when analyzing an opponent. At first, we had the ability to review our own replay files. If you're a professional LCS team, you get your own replay files to look at your own shit. But other than that, it's very difficult to scout enemy teams or enemy opponents based upon maybe the nuances of how they play or their style or particular lane matchups of how a certain person plays this style. And so I think pro views are actually going to reveal quite a lot. But more importantly, they are going to be the most powerful tool in an analyst's arsenal. And on top of that, it's also going to help aspiring analysts as well too, because they'll be able to break down micro aspects of a particular lane or matchup or how it's played at the highest level of play. And this might actually improve the entire scene as far as even the amateur scene or the academy players and whatnot. And it's also, as a sidebar, I think it's going to kind of push away maybe the stigma of pro players not willing to share all of their secrets in terms of how they lane, against a particular matchup with the academy player that's on their same team, right? Because they don't want to lose their starting spot. Well, now it's kind of forced, right? It's all public information. So really, an academy player on your same fucking team could look at your pro view and realize exactly what you're doing correct that they aren't and level up their own game. And so now it's going to be this perpetual snowball to where now everyone is looking at each other's pro views, especially in the same role. And now they're able to figure out these different tips and whatnot. And because you're at such a high level as far as knowledge, right? That you can see the different nuances and you have the eye to actually perceive something versus if someone in fucking gold is looking at a challenger player, they probably aren't going to see all of the nuance, right? So now all of ProView allows the ability to basically learn the micro aspects without having to actually play. And I think this is very valuable for an analyst because famously, Monty would always talk about, Monte Cristo would always talk about how he focused on the macro because specifically, first of all, he couldn't look at the lane matchups anyways, right? Because of the observers. But second of all, was that he was never going to be better than a pro player in terms of how a pro player may figure out a specific matchup. Does Gangplank beat Kale or, does Nidalee in the jungle beat Ivern? So all these different nuances and whatnot. It's like, yeah, the closer and closer you get in terms of maybe what a counter pick is or a counter pick isn't and how it's played out, as it gets closer and closer, in terms of maybe a 51% is better than the 49% champion pick. And that determination then amounts to the player skill themselves and how they play it, right? Is it fucking Tarzan versus, I don't know, fucking Ixmithy or something? It's like, yeah, well, Ixmithy's probably going to get dominated, right? So with that said, Monte Cristo, I think his idea about focusing on the macro was correct, but now you have this added layer to where you can actually catch up in terms of learning about the micro aspects as long as you're studious and you're able to actually judge it with kind of an open mind and kind of, open concepts when you're studying the game itself. And I really don't think ProView itself will really help the low elo people in terms of just the people that are kind of stuck in their one track mind in the sense that they only understand how to play the champion maybe if they're playing it themselves, right? But I think analysts are smarter than that, and they'll be able to take those concepts and apply it to all different types of games that they watch to where now they understand the nuances of a particular lane matchup and maybe how a particular player plays in regards to such matchups and whatnot. So I compare this idea of ProView, I guess, kind of like having air tools, right? If you're a mechanic. air tools are fantastic, right? And the fact that you could just completely take off lug nuts, right, with your air wrench, right? And it's way faster than using a socket wrench or, a ratchet or whatnot, right? And that's the same thing with like a car lift. Yeah, sure, I could work on a car on the ground and jack it up, manually or whatever. But instead, I could put it on the hoist, right? The car lift, have it automatically lift up with the hydraulic lift. And then there I could work on the transmission, I could work on the fucking muffler, whatever. It's just way easier for me to do. And that's how I view Proview as, is that, well, now we don't have to fucking track the little mini map for the jungler of where they're going. And I don't really know how he's trying to clear, if he's looking at other lanes, like what his timings are as far as like him keeping track of things, where his pings are at or anything. Like now I have all the tools, right? Now I have my full fucking, metric set with my SAE set as well too, right? Like I don't have to fucking try and jimmy rig all this shit on a bolt and then strip it, right? So now I have the correct tools in order to work on this car. So I think that's huge, first of all. Second, you can keep track of player tendencies of certain players. And I think this is going to be incredibly important if you want to go on the psychological aspect, right? Maybe a certain player has a tick to where it's like, oh, well, they see this certain play and 90% of the time they're going to be doing this within the lane or whatnot. Now you can keep track of those things because you can specifically look at this player and see exactly what he does. Now, this goes both in part to your own player on your own team, if you're an analyst judging this, or the enemy player, right, on the enemy team. Now you can judge that and track that a lot more readily available, right? And so I think the amount of nuance that is going to happen as far as analytical observations is concerned is going to be that much greater. And now we're going to get even a more abundance or a flow of information in regards to a player's particular play style. And I think we'll see this kind of revolutionize exactly how we view analytical content, as it were. And of course, this will transition over into player coaches as well, too. This is going to be one of the most invaluable things, I think, for player coaches, in terms of they'll be able to watch different pro players, figure out their tendencies, figure out their nuances, and then relay that to their own team and their own, player, right? Like top lane, for instance. If you're watching Impact or something and you realize how he's actually very good at dodging these dives and maybe setting up the wave beforehand that you couldn't actually see on the broadcast or whatnot, and how he plays against different opponents or whatnot, it's like, okay, well, now he's been kind of keeping track of Spica, so he knows that a dive is going to happen in the top lane later on, and so he prepares the wave, maybe shit like that, or sets down a ward. And you may not have realized that within a broadcast setting, but now you're able to track all these different nuances. It's going to be incredibly invaluable. And I could see player coaches just going off on this shit and actually pointing towards, that a player does this, this, and this. And I've seen it in 4 different games. Here's all this data, and he gives it to his own top laner and says, I have a feeling that he's going to be doing this often. So now we can play off of this data. And, certain tendencies are very hard to break. That's why they're fucking tendencies, right? So that information is going to be more valuable for the scouter or for the player coach themselves than it is actually for the player to try and rectify their own tendencies, because most of the time they aren't even going to be able to notice that type of thing anyways. This tool is also going to be very helpful for scouting and for recruitment, right? Because you can literally just watch and binge watch a player's VODs if you're thinking about recruiting them, right? You're going to be able to see, okay, now I see exactly how Someday plays, in the top lane or whatnot. I know exactly like why he's so good as a player, or maybe PoE. I understand how he plays very defensive, and maybe he ends up keeps crashing waves, and then he's able to just kind of hold his lane state and keep it steady. Or, maybe I understand how I don't know, there's problems with sticks A or something, and so maybe he's not looking too hot. But also, then too, maybe I could look at his support and be like, well, sticks A really isn't that bad. It's just when you look at the interactions that are happening within the lane, it's actually his support's fault. Maybe that's something to consider rather than going off of conjecture from the entire community, or maybe his coach previously, or previously his support player or whatnot. Now you actually have the raw data to go and look and binge these VODs. As a scout or as a GM, if you have the chops to even digest that type of analytical demo, right? Now, I think this entire thing creates a distinct advantage for the good players, the players that already know their shit. They already know how to micro, and they already know how to play out their lane states and the early laning phase. And I think that's just going to make them look even more kind of appetizing, I guess, as for recruiters, right? For scouters and whatnot, looking into the next year or whatnot. If we're looking at like 2022, right? So that's going to be great, but I think it's going to make bad players look even fucking worse, because they were portraying like this effigy, I guess, to where maybe they were a great player or whatnot, and everyone views them as a great player, but you're actually able to see through that facade now, because you can actually download the fucking VODs and you can watch the replays from that point of view and actually see what this player is doing, their camera movements and whatnot. So I think this is just going to create a bigger gap, if not, what it once already was to begin with anyways. And this might also then be used for negotiation in terms of maybe how a player negotiates their contract in terms of how much better they are. Maybe we're going to get more a wider gap in terms of actually how much a player is worth, in fact, or maybe a player is not worth. It could swing in either direction, but I think it is actually going to swing in one or the other. I don't think it's going to stay the same at all. So one big thing I think that is not talked about and is often overlooked, which is that other regions get a distinct advantage because North America, I mean, you can't view, China's Proview, you can't view LCK's Proview, you can't view Europe's Proview because they don't fucking have it, right? Or maybe some of them do, but I don't know, there's probably some region lock shit or something. But point is that North America, lolesports.com is very easy to access. You could totally access it, create a Smurf account within North America, and then buy it as a pro team. Say if you're Fnatic and you're gonna go to Worlds, you could already download all their shit, all their VODs, and then go one by one for the North American team that is in your group. So now North America is at somewhat of a disadvantage in terms of international competition. So this is going to get very tricky in that sense of I guess the analytical content in terms of the imbalance between regions and whatnot. Now it's going to get a little bit fucky, right, boys? So I think, though, the biggest thing of all within these pro views is that because we don't have any form of how to figure out who is communicating what, because we don't actually get to listen to voice comms, this is going to be the closest fucking thing, man, because now we get to see pings, right, which show both intent and it shows shot calling. And these two things are going to be fucking crazy valuable, because now teams and both analysts or whatnot, outside analysts even, or co-streamers or whatever the fuck, they're going to be able to see all these different pings, people pinging like crazy, because as we know, everyone communicates both in pings and in voice comms, right? Usually if you're in voice comms, you're also going to ping too, right? I'm going over here, I'm pinging on my way, whatever, right? So realistically, we're going to see the dynamics of the communication between teams. We're also going to see the lack of communication between teams. And I think that's going to be just incredibly important. And on top of this, I think this is also going to help create better narratives in terms of how analysts create true narratives, right? Not false narratives of the shot calling and the intent of certain plays. And with that too, maybe if you're a content creator or maybe if you're an interviewer, now you're going to be able to pick up on this if you do a little bit extra homework and whatnot. Because I know, for instance, that I'm going to be start looking at these pro views if I have time in order to see who's pinging, who's constantly pinging, who's communicating, how much are they flipping the cameras to see exactly what's going on with their teammates and whatnot. I think this is going to revolutionize every different piece and facet of content and analytical capabilities within North America itself. And it's just kind of fantastic to see, but it's also disappointing that something like this just hasn't really happened at a grand scale before. So, while it's great, that I guess you have loved, if ever loved at all, it's kind of shitty that it's happened so late. But hey, we can at least be thankful that, we're in the here and now. But I think just this entire idea of unlocking ProView, I guess, will unlock a lot of different things for analysts that are very hungry for information, and also even amateur analysts when they're trying to break down specific plays or whatnot. I know you can't use ProView within certain content or whatever, right? Like if you're creating YouTube videos and shit, which Riot should just completely abandon. But with that said, I think they're doing that because it is behind a paywall, right? So theoretically, a content creator could just upload all different pro views, right? And then break it down with their own voice and nuance and whatnot. But really, you could just mute that content creator and you would automatically get the access to every pro view for free. So that's probably why they aren't doing that. And they haven't necessarily figured out the work around that aspect. So I don't know how that they would work that out. Maybe you can't take full-on clips of something so obvious, especially since Riot kind of has a lot of IP rights around their game anyways, right? So they could probably remove that video from a lot of different channels that are being dishonest about the content that they're producing. But then again, there is the transformative property of using other content and shit. So I don't really know how that works, but I feel like that's one of the pitfalls within this entire thing. But I still think it's going to benefit a lot of amateur analysts anyways. It's going to benefit me for my content and shit, my interviews and stuff. So I think overall, this is just a wicked sick thing, but I don't think a lot of people realize the actual, I guess, extremities that this can go to in terms of just content and analytical basis of even team coaches or player coaches and whatnot. So it's just bonkers how this is going to be an avalanche, I guess, that is going to be started.